Hello, everyone. This is Endgame number 2 of the 100 Endgames You Must Know. Uh, this chapter is, well, not chapter, this Endgame is all about what happens when the pawn is on the 6th rank and when the defending king occupies the squares in front of the pawn. Uh, in the previous endgame, we looked at positions where the king could not get in front of the pawn. But what happens when the king can get in front of the pawn? How do you deal with these endgames, specifically these endgames when the pawn is already on the 6th rank? So, with that being said, let's hop right into it. So the first position we have on the board, it is a very simple case. It's white to move and very simply wins because the king, after the pawn pushes to the 7th rank, the king has to move and the pawn promotes. But what happens if we have a position like this, but it's black to move? Now the endgame is actually drawn. So this chapter, it has a lot to do with opposition and when it's useful. So in the book, it actually describes that like a lot of times opposition is overstated in endgames. Like it's not always useful, but in this case, it really, really is. And in this position, black can actually take opposition, and a general rule of thumb is that the pawn cannot promote if both kings are opposed when the pawn is on the 7th rank. So right now, both kings are opposed, and if white pushes, the kings are opposed, and white cannot promote. So that is a good general rule of thumb, and it really is like when the opposition is decisive when the pawn is on the 6th rank. If the pawn's on the 5th rank or elsewhere, as we'll talk in later endgames, that changes. But when the pawn is on the 6th rank, opposition is a difference between winning and drawing. Almost always, as a general rule of thumb. We'll go over an exception soon, actually. So yeah, this exact endgame, drawn if it's black to move, winning if it's white to move. In this next example, we see that white can maintain opposition. They can gain opposition by stepping in front of the king, and white wins because the king moves like this, and the kings are not opposed when the pawn is on the 7th, and so black has to move out of the way, and white can promote. And if we go, for example, white would draw this if they went king b6 instead of a6, because now black has opposition, and if you push, then the pawn is on the 7th rank, and the kings are opposed. So that means white cannot promote, and it's going to be stalemate. And just a quick little note on what happens if you don't push? Well, then the position is going to repeat itself. For example, if white did not gain opposition by going king a6, but instead went king b6, then what would happen is that if you go back and here, black maintains opposition. Black can actually go wrong here, very funnily enough, if they go here, because now white maintains opposition, and now black loses. So you have to be kind of precise, but yeah, the position will just keep repeating itself if you don't push the pawn to the 7th rank. And yeah, so this is another position here that is very interesting to look like, that is winning for white. Let's look at another position now. So now this is white to move, and black has opposition. So, for example, if these kings were one square backwards, then this would be a draw. For example, something like this. Something like this. Actually, white still has opposition here. White still has opposition here. So actually, no. It's actually if with this would be a draw. This would be a draw because black has maintained opposition. Actually, in this position, white is straight up winning because black can't maintain opposition. So in this scenario, there is no way to maintain opposition because the square that the king has to go to maintain opposition is controlled by the pawn. So no matter where you go, no matter where black goes, black loses. So for example, if they go straight here, then king g6 is the simplest way, maintaining opposition. And here you go. The king has to move again, and now the pawn is on the 7th, and the kings are not opposed. Pawn is on the 7th, kings are not opposed, it's a win. Pawn on the 7th, kings are opposed, then it's a draw. So, very, very good note. But now there's one exception, and one exception only to this endgame. I shouldn't say one exception only, but what happens if it's a knight pawn? That actually changes things a little bit. In this position, so white is the one that's defending, and it's white to move. It's king h1, which would usually be losing, but actually it's not, because if black wants to go king f2, guarding the promotion square, well, it's stalemate. So when it's a knight's pawn that's on the 6th rank, it is a draw in most cases, and in this case, white doesn't use regular opposition here. They use diagonal opposition, which is not usually important, but in this specific endgame, it is very important that white maintains diagonal opposition. And if they just go, like, if black doesn't want to do a stalemate, well, if they push, then here, and if black goes back, then they can do this, king g1, and bam, opposition. So there really is, in this endgame, you can use regular opposition or diagonal opposition. So if we go back here, so a knight's pawn is very interesting because you can use regular opposition if it's available, or diagonal opposition because of the possibilities of stalemate. So this is kind of the basics of like what to do when, how to deal with endgames when the pawn is on the 6th rank. Probably how to deal with endgames is not the most accurate. It's most like how to, like, understanding endgames when the pawn is on the 6th rank. King plus pawn versus king endgames. So hopefully you guys enjoyed, and looking forward to the next one.